We are now kicking off the Show Me the Money track. And again, we're going to start with a panel. I'm going to ask my panelists to come up and join me, if you guys can come up and join me. And we're going to be talking about a range of things around investment, around valuation. I mean, who doesn't want money to make a game? I mean, of course we do. Of course we do. So hopefully we can give you some insights. Hopefully you guys will have questions. Hopefully you guys will get lots of value out of this process. So I will sit down and talk to this lovely bunch of people. So, valuing your company. How many of you in the audience are currently fundraising? How many of you are thinking about fundraising shortly? Okay, and how many of you don't care about money? Sorry, that was mean. That was mean. Okay, so valuation is a really difficult thing. Working out what you're worth, working out how much you can ask for, how much you can get, and what you have to give away for that process is non-trivial. It's a process that I think about regularly. I unfortunately have a business partner who's worked with investors a long time, so I let her do the heavy lifting and a lot of the thinking. But I think it's also about who you're selling to. At the end of the day, something is worth what other people will pay for, I would argue. But anyway, that's my view on the subject so far. I want to learn from these guys. I want to understand what you guys think and your various experiences. So let's start. Do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about your history? Because obviously you've done lots and lots of fun stuff, but also what you're up to now.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jesus Bosch from Product Madness. I'm the general manager in Spain, where we have set up a studio last year. Now, I'm also involved in Madness Venture. It's an initiative from Product Madness in which we invest in early-stage free-to-play mobile development studios. And before that, I built 3 gaming companies and sold one of them to a private equity fund. So yeah, I have perspective on these things from different angles, I would say.
Thank you. Glib, do you want to explain your role and what you do?
Hi, my name is Glib. I'm in industry for more than 10 years. I probably were working in like different companies like developers, publishers, outsourcing. Currently, I'm driving my studio of OUTLOU Games, who is doing mobile games, specifically like Idle Tycoon type of, and also I'm a co-founder of Doghowl Games, who is doing like PC console development. Like of AA titles, so different stuff. Yeah, would be nice to talk about investments. That is very hot topic and very controversial sometimes.
So Kim, do you want to talk about yourself?
All right, nice to be here. Super happy. My name is Kim. I spent the past 5 years at Paradox, PC publisher. I was, among many things, the chief strategy officer. Before that, I was the VP GM at King. I managed the studio and the Pet Rescue franchise. And before that, I was at PlayStation at US R&D, California, built PlayStation 4 among many things, and then a bunch of failed studios before that. Today, I'm independent, so I do angel investments, coaching, advising, just trying to be me and add value. And I guess for this panel, I'll probably take the angel investment perspective, but I'll probably mix it up with my experience of acquiring companies in later stages. So we'll see if that gets useful.
Eliza.
Hi, I'm Eliza Jappinen. I'm CEO of Visible Realms. We're a mobile game company, but our whole focus is on building franchise IP through mobile gaming. I've had 10 years of experience in TV development, IP development, music, and games. So I'm actually playing the part of fundraising. So I come with that perspective.
And on the screen behind us, we've got Samuel. Samuel, can you hear me okay? Great stuff. Yes, we can hear you fine. So do you want to just explain your background, please?
I'm the founder and CEO of Differentiation, which is a venture capital and private equity firm based out of Seoul. We have offices across Asia and Hong Kong and Hanoi, Vietnam. And then as well as recently we expanded into Los Angeles, California. I actually started off as a founder. Started my first company in Shanghai, China, which I sold to a private equity firm. So, similar to, sorry, I forgot your name. The first panelist.
Yes. That was Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, we were, I've been sitting on both sides, and yeah, so great to be here.
And in this context, I should add that I'm a founder of a living game publisher called Fundamentally Games. We announced our consumer-facing publishing label just before Gamescom called Jetpack Collective. And we announced our first game called Phageborn, a deck-building game, just before Gamescom as well. And then we are currently in the fundraising round, as I'm sure you can imagine. So enough of me. Let's talk about you. So, Jesus, let's start off just by framing it. What is valuation in practice, and why does it matter?
Yeah, valuation in practice is how much are you willing to give of your equity to investors in exchange of their money. And it matters because a wrong valuation can ruin literally the future of your company. If the valuation is too high because you are greedy and you want as much as possible for the little equity as possible, you could have problems in next rounds. You know, you have to demonstrate that you have grown the value, and investors could not follow up if you don't demonstrate that. So it's very risky.
But I think it's interesting because I think what you're highlighting there is there's actually a different set of thinking that's needed each stage, and you've got to bear in mind that when you're first raising your first kind of what's often called friends, family, fools, although I hate that phrase. I think I'm not a fan of that personally. But when you're getting that pre-seed investment, the way that you divide your shares out, the way that you work out how much you're offering, has a profound effect down the path. And I think, is it fair that you've got to think about that pathway through to the classical kind of seed, Series A, Series B, C, whatever it might be? I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, you have to plan the whole roadmap. I would say you will be wrong for sure, but you have to have an idea of how much shares you want to keep for the co-founders, for the investors, for the key employees, for everybody. And make sure not giving 50% to the friends, full and family, because then you will have problems in the other. The investors will always want entrepreneurs to be motivated and have a big stake in the company.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Glib, from your point of view, I mean, again, just to kind of rephrase that question, why does it matter and what is it in practice?
So, in my idea, it's also about like money, about what you want to achieve, or what's your like financial goals of the company, because each company is striving to drive their roadmap that they have in the mind, because unfortunately or fortunately, the market is not about creating amazing games. It's also about driving your financial properly. And as a result, you will have a certain valuation that should be done like alongside in a certain way. And as Jesus said, that the way how you perceive it, the way how you evaluate yourself, it's a very like difficult balance of not asking for too less or not asking for too more, and that's a certain art. And usually, a good investor should and must help you to build it. So they shouldn't take too much because they has much more experience, and as well they shouldn't give you too low because you won't be really motivated. And it's a certain art, because we probably all saw many investments that didn't work, even if it was like millions and millions of dollars, because they took too much, or they buy out the whole company, but they were expecting that it will grow, and it didn't, because that's the deal.
And it's particularly complicated, I'd argue, because when you're starting out, you've got no revenue. You have an idea.
Yeah.
You may have something playable, but you often don't have very discrete data that provides evidence of success, just indications of potential.
Yeah.
So how does that actually work? I mean, what does that valuation mean in that context?
It's very subjective thing, because I think it's a matter of how well do you believe in the team, and this belief probably based on your previous like relations, experience of the team, strategy, the way how the person think, what he wants to do, what preparations he already did. Because yes, there is a cases when somebody just gives someone money, just okay, I know him, that's the money. But I think behind that there should be a certain strategy when you understand what will be your path in like nearest 5 years. And you should understand whether you want to go with the same investor, or there will be a change somewhere, to understand how the investor look at you and what they want to do as well down the road, because it will really depend.
Sounds a bit like you're kind of hitting on something that Jesus was saying about thinking about the pipeline of that valuation.
Yes.
And almost like not just taking about the pipeline of the valuation, but how do you take that investor with you so that they are motivated as well to continue to invest in you during that journey? Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it's probably, but it's, there is no exact like instruction how to do it. That's a thing.
What do you mean there's no route map? I want one. Kim, go on. Again, same question. I know it's not good etiquette on a panel to repeat the same question, but I think in this context, getting down to the bottom and there's a process called the 5 whys, and I'm trying to do the 5 whys with you guys. We've heard lots of different ways. So what is evaluation and why does it matter?
So I'm going to avoid that question and talk about what I want to talk about instead.
That is definite panel etiquette. Thank you.
So I just want to add some flavor. I agree with these guys. So I'm not a romantic guy and I don't look at life very philosophical, but I think this is like dating, right? You're looking for a marriage, right? If you're going to bed with someone and you want to get married, which essentially this is, it's a long journey, make sure you date, right? Fool around, make sure you're going to bed with the people you're actually going to stay with. The difference here is that this marriage has an end, right? The person you're going to bed with, eventually they want to go out. They want to exit and they want to move on. So whatever you go in bed with, it will have an ending. So be certain that you go in bed with the right person and then know there will be an exit at some point. And that's fine.
It's interesting you say that because Harry Hammer, who's now LVP but at the time was at Oxford Capital, had a really great line, which is, be careful who you get in bed with, because most investment relationships last longer than the average marriage.
All right.
So sorry, Eliza. Again, Kim, if you have any other things you want to add to what the valuation, the practicalities of it, feel free. But otherwise, Eliza, I'll move on to you.
From my point of view, I agree, and it is really important from my perspective too to be like who am I partnering with, and how much can I find out, and for how long can I kind of without. And then the other thing is, you guys, if you're fundraising, you're always under the pinch and pressure, right, of having money. So how long can you date and fool around before you're like, put that ring on my finger already, That being said, put a ring. No, anyway, sorry. Now I'm going to do Beyonce, and I wouldn't do it well.
You can do it.
But actually, I think one of the practical advices to give to people, especially because, we've all heard fluffy stories here. I'm sorry. You guys give the fluffy roundabout answers. That's your deal. But I've heard that, generally it's like you want to 3 times your evaluation during each funding round, so if you can do it, that's what you want to be going for. And quite often it's like millions usually the first, and then, you go 3 million, you kind of go in that. And that's a kind of a good benchmark, kind of a place to look at, is this really valued that? Do you really think that that's worth that? How do you feel about it yourself? And then how would they look at it?
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of like proof point principle there as well, because as you go through those stages, you've got to present a hypothesis and demonstrate delivery. And if you can't, and it's not all going to go well, you're going to find things, but how you adapt to those things that don't go well and how you learn and demonstrate that, again, I think is what helps reinforce that valuation. So Samuel, from your point of view, again, I'm going to ask the question to you that I've asked the others, but I'm hoping you're going to come at it from a slightly different point of view. But I'm thinking, again, we're talking very kind of loosely, it is this level that we're asking for in terms of exchange, but what meaningful elements are you drawing on when you're deciding that valuation feels right?
I would say I would definitely agree with all of what the panelists had said. But for me, I think a super important thing, I think there are 2 very important things. The first being it being a great benchmark for a founder to, in a specific industry, to kind of compare themselves with other founders in that industry, maybe in different geographies, right? For example, a mobile gaming company based in South Korea that's just addressing the South Korean market versus a mobile gaming company based out of the United States that's addressing the entire global market. Same stage of the company, valuation will be very different, right? So a benchmark of where you are as a business, and sort of that sets the tone for where you can eventually get to, right? Second thing I think super important when doing valuation is, you may, in the same situation, you may get a very different valuation from very different sets of investors, right? So, I think through that exercise, it's super important that you find the right partner right? Because again, this is a long-term, long-term partnership, right? If someone gives you a super high valuation, but that comes with caveats, with ratchets, where basically they can take the company away from you down the road if you don't hit your targets. It could be a poison pill, right? Versus someone gives you a lower valuation, but they're really great strategic partner and can help you really grow the business a lot faster than if you were to just grow it on your own. So I think those two are the most important things I would think about when thinking about valuations.
So when you're talking about, are you kind of drawing the differentiation between smart money and dumb money, or are you kind of hinting at the sort of be wary as an investee of maybe some more predatory tactics? Is that kind of what you're hinting at there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of those, but the most important thing is that you shouldn't just jump at the highest number that you get, right? All money comes with different conditions, right? And it's very important to get into the weeds of the details, right? Because you could raise, these days it's more and more common for early stage pre-revenue gaming companies to raise money in terms of more of a debt instrument rather than equity. So and then eventually convert down the road as you start making revenue, right?
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to get time to go into sort of things like convertible notes rather than through kind of like direct investment. I think that's a conversation probably for another time, but very, very interesting one if anyone has time to investigate that stuff. I've only just started learning about how that operates myself. So here's this, just to sort of pick on what Sam was talking about. The understanding the partner, understanding what they bring to the deal, understanding the kind of value that you're doing. I'm also thinking about things like your proof points that you've got already and how you establish that. It almost feels like a dance to me. Are you talking about? Do you think you were talking about different valuations to different types of people, or do you need to stick to one valuation and take into account the different parties you might want to engage with?
Wow, the question is a bit open, but I mean,
sorry.
Yeah, no, the valuation depends on a lot of factors, but the initial valuation, I think, is the trickiest part. And I think one way to approach it is very simple. Go and see, very obvious, go and see how much money you need and a reasonable equity part for it, and I think that's the...
That sounds like guessing.
Well, yeah, but at the beginning you only have a spreadsheet, that you can put anything there. Yeah. And yeah, it's guessing, really. Yeah, you make your projections and say very fancy words about finance and so, but it's only guessing at the beginning.
But I think we can guess smartly, can't we? Because I mean, there are sources of data, however loose they are. If I'm doing PC content, I'm going to probably take some Steam Spy data or something like that. I might take some other market data if I can get my hands on it. If it's mobile, I'll probably be getting something like an App Annie or whatever to at least see, okay, of the market, we see these types of games getting this kind of revenue on average, and these are the kinds of things we're aiming for. So at least base your assumptions on something that's evidence-based. And presumably you can also do small tests, like the Facebook test, the NPS test, the day one retention if you've managed to build something so far. But to me, it feels like we've got to find proof points that we can then build those assumptions on to be able to build the case for that money that we know we need, and therefore what percentage we feel we can give away. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah. Also, what I wanted what I meant is that it's not the same to raise money for an hyper-casual game studio than AAA or something bigger. So yeah, but yeah, definitely there are many data sources, and you have to build a credible story with a credible team, with a credible value proposition, and all that. Yeah.
So, Glib, I'm just going to turn that to you. So, I think what this is quite greatly described is this kind of educated guesswork process that we go through, that we qualify, that we provide backup information for. But I feel like there's something else that's missing. That it's part of the expectation of the journey that you're going on, and I think part of that valuation process is being able to credibly say, this is what we're trying. This is what we're currently able to do. This is what we're trying to do, and this is the big picture about where. This is something that's changed the way that we now think about our valuation, And how do we present the unicorn scenario, whatever that unicorn scenario looks like? You may not get to that, but the point I think unless you have that aspiration, it's quite hard to justify some of the valuation that you might do. Is that fair, or am I just guessing?
I think that guessing should be decreased as much as possible. We have instruments, tools, experience, people to make it like smaller and smaller. There still will be like a portion of it that it's still guessing. We don't know how it will go. But the thing is, I think that the owners of the company should start firstly from themselves, understanding where they're going, why they're going, what resources they have, what experience they have, and try to build a certain road, as we previously talked, a roadmap, understanding what resources they require to actually achieve it. You can calculate the amount of like people you need, resources, user acquisition expenses, other stuff. If you can't answer yourself on this question, you need to find people who will help you answer it. Because when you approach the investor or any other company that's ready to give you this funding, they will ask the same questions. And if you will have no answers, you will look not the great. And that's also a part of the learning, especially when you just started. You should go. If you don't know, you should go. For the first one, they will give you enough questions to do all your homework and to prepare for the next one. You approach next one, there is additional questions. You prepare for the third one. Because right now in the market, there's too much money, but they're just lying. And people don't know whom they can like give it. And as you said, like you should find like a dancing or you say and sleeping with, right? You need to find that partner, and it's also like you need to convince, and you should, aside from coming from your side saying, hey, okay, we need like, I don't know, 5 million, right? Then you need to support it. And you can support it with your experience, with the benchmarks, because you can compare it to the same people in the market. If you were running in studios that were doing like hundreds of millions per year, definitely that guy can like get some money to do a game. He know how to operate 100 or 1,000 people studio. That worth a lot.
I think that's a much better way to put it in some ways. It's not, whilst we're using the term guess historically in this conversation, what we actually mean is we're making a kind of mental map of the components that's going to let us get from point A to point B, point C, point D. And in that process, we're working out what the proof points we need now and that we're going to need in the future, and how we support from a justifiable process to get through that journey. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's a very broad topic. I guess we can talk like hours, and I want to give information to be somehow useful.
Yeah, exactly.
And the thing is that's true. You should put all the risk, you should put all the strategy, you should try to estimate every effort that you have, and you can support with that. Because if you will say, hey, I just need 5 million, so that means nothing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of the time is about thinking through, starting off at working at what success looks like to you. But I think you also have to bear in mind, what does success look like to that investor? I think if you're going to be able to justify your valuation, you've got to understand not just the proof points that you need to prove that your game will work, but also the proof points that investor needs to know that they can exit at an appropriate point. And get the return that they're expecting. Does that make sense? Yeah,
that's true. But you can answer it only after you do the whole homework and you process it, and then you can talk about valuation. Because after that you say, okay, we need this money, I worth this amount, and now I want this thing, and you will get this part. And then they agree and saying, hey, yeah, we agree, but we think that it's too much or too low, and start basically a discussion. How much money they need, or how much money they need.
So, Kim, I mean, do you have any thoughts on this? And I'm also wondering about, and one of the things that always strikes me is that you shouldn't be necessarily talking to an investor about your money troubles. You should be talking about how their money is going to enable you to do something spectacular. Is that a fair summary?
Oh, for sure. And I want to look back also. I think the ambition of the journey of the company is the key thing, right? You want to see potential. So I'm working with a studio in Nigeria to build mobile games by Africa for Africa. I know nothing about Africa, but it's so amazingly fascinating knowing that there's 300 million active smartphones. Obviously, there's no talent, there's no infrastructure, there's no payment system, but it's going to be the biggest population on Earth within a number of decades. So we're very early in. There's no valuation for this company. Just we looked at it and it's like, why even bother? It's only cash flow. Like, what's your cost? And we fund, I fund the part of the cost of the studio, and we aim to get to a certain key points where we can measure anything tangible by releasing games. Once you have a certain set of data, I think that's the only time you have any chance of actually building a case on paper by numbers. Otherwise, we're all guessing, so we could just roll the dice. But so I like the idea of knowing. I mean, it is going to be huge at some point. For me, just how early do I want to bet on my own money? I don't really care about the valuation per se. But once they figured out a number of games on the market, and we can start looking at number of downloads and the LTVs and the usual stuff, I think that's where you start building that case. And until that, it's just how much does it cost?
But again, isn't then that example, it's understand that local market. So I know Carry First guys are doing some interesting stuff. And what they're trying to do is look at the payment mechanisms that do exist in that market, which are basically prepaid cards, which they also distribute. So then they can publish games that then going to tap people spending more money on those cards. Now, the reason I mention all that is, I mean, obviously it's not related to valuation, but what it says is that sometimes those valuations are not just necessarily just in the obvious path, but how you're working with that ecosystem. Does that make sense?
I guess. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is on the journey of a game company, I think up until a certain stage we're all guessing. So I'm not interested of guessing up in that
Thought
point.
experimenting, surely.
Sure, right? And you can do your forecasting and your numbers, but I think up until a certain point it doesn't matter. A studio is even proven to be able to deliver and generate, revenue, audience, profit, value in some way. And up until a point it isn't. So up until that point, you either bet all your money and you're fine with it because you see the potential of what it can be, and then from thereafter you start doing the actual valuations.
And it sounds like what you're saying there is that there's really only a certain subset of investors that you can talk to who have got that appetite.
Exactly.
Cool. Eliza.
I mean, I thought you brought up something that was really interesting, which is that, that you really needed the proof. And it's been my experience that you need all of the proof. You need to be vetted. I would say it's less dating and fooling around as much as it is an arranged marriage. And I think that it's very kind of silly to talk about actually the dating part, because the dating part is you as a company trying to suss out what metrics you need. Men maybe meeting a like-minded speculative person, and those are your angels, who will believe in you before you have those numbers, and you get them on board. But when it comes to the big investment, it needs to be so foolproof that, unless your mama and your daddy are telling you that you're coming with the cow, you're not gonna get arranged marriage, And I find that a little disheartening, because again, as you guys talked about, there is a lot of money out there, and there is a lot of great creativity itching to burst forth and have a chance. So I feel like maybe dating should involve dinner, paid for, and some baby steps so that the dating can continue, so that it would be speculative, but within reason, right? Within a reasonable levels of dating, so that it doesn't have to be the arranged marriage, still could have the romance, still could have all the budding aspects of something beautiful happening, all organically, but, without one side suffering necessarily.
You were talking about being fluffy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Fluffy.
So Sam, I'm going to ask if you're a romantic at heart. Are you in? Do you buy this dating process idea? This thing kind of soft. I mean, to be honest, I think most of the time it's about us as investees talking to investors and asking advice, actually engaging and finding out what you need, as much as it is for us to be able to understand what we are offering. Is that fair? I mean, I'd like to know your general thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I kind of disagree with one of the things that was mentioned earlier. I think you had mentioned it, which is, I think it's important to be super honest about your problems, your challenges, and even if you're running out of money, then why is that the case, right? Obviously, when you raise a certain amount of money, there was a specific plan in place. So investors always want to see, how did you execute on the plan that you had set out when you first raised the money, right? And then if you didn't execute on that well, what was the reason, right? And it's very important, and we've seen, quite often, a lot of times, companies pivoting their business model or, pivoting just the entirety of the business itself, right? I can give you guys an anecdote, very interesting. There was a gaming company founded by some friends in South Korea, and they were building, big MMORPG games. Company was valued at around maybe 200 million. Wasn't really making much money. The investors which had invested had put in money for maybe 6, 7, 8 years, and then company was on the verge of going bankrupt. So all the investors, I think 80% of them tried to sell their shares, but couldn't find buyers to buy the shares. So the founder ended up acquiring a small team. It was actually a failed team that was working on something, and then they decided to kind of try something different and launch something. That company is, the company that they acquired built Battleground, which is now, as you guys know, PUBG, right? So one of the largest games in the world and valued at multi-billions, right? So,
and just for clarity, just so you know what I meant by that process was, it was more of we see a lot of pitches from people where they only talk about why they need the money to be able to pay staff, rather than talking about what that staff will then deliver, if that makes sense. But I agree. I'm glad you raised that, because I think that's a really important thing, that transparency and being able to say, look, this is what we had, this is what we learnt, and then being able to pivot. I think that is a really key thing. Yeah, that trust. Like we said, this is a relationship that will last some time, and if you've got smart money, you want to tap into the expertise of that smart money, don't you?
Yeah.
So, following that through, though, I interrupted your flow. You were talking about, I think, that general principle of, how, what is it that, what is the kind of proof that makes you go, yeah, I feel confident in that team?
Yeah, I think it's definitely execution based on the plan that one sets out, right? And again, the plan can change along the way, right? And the core team should be able to pivot and be able to know what's working, what's not working. And that's why I think it's really important to have this kind of open dialogue and continue to be flexible and not be too stubborn, right? Oftentimes, a lot of the founders that we see that fail majorly are the ones that don't take the advice of people who are there to try to help you, right?
No, I think that's absolutely massively important. It's an interesting balance, though, because I think you've got to, as a CEO, you've got to be curious, you've got to be constantly learning, you've got to leave your ego at the door. But at the same time, when you're presenting, you've got to have enough bravado to make the case. And I particularly suffer from a problem where I'm a bit too British and not quite American enough. As in, I don't paint the optimistic kind of like, this is what the vision is, this is what the exciting thing is. So here's from your point of view, what do you think what is the balance between this kind of like leaving your ego at the door, but also leveraging your ego to be able to get people to pay attention and be interested in what you're doing?
Well, if you mean in terms of valuation.
In terms of valuation,
yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we're in a free market, right? And the offer and demand will found the common point, and also, the talent of the individual people involved in the negotiation will have something to do about that. But I believe it's mostly depending on the stage of the startup. Also, if you're at the very beginning, it's about the team. If it's in a later stage, it's more about the achievements. But yeah, it's to find the right. Yeah, to me.
It's always a balance, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it balances itself, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Glib, what about yourself? Is this a natural balancing thing? You'll just find your hole, you'll find your spot, or is there some kind of like attitudinal kind of advice you'd give entrepreneurs trying to communicate what their valuation is and why their valuation should be, understood or believed?
First of all, I think that it should be answered by investors because probably they're the ball on their side in this topic. But as a studio, I believe that basically when we're starting on early stages, you should be more optimistic in the way how things are going, and giving the team as much as possible tools that will help them grow, and not be too, as you mentioned, like British, because they can hinder their growth and development. So basically, as much as you can give and as much as makes sense, you should give it.
But doing it so you're aware of your restrictions,
yes.
but being able to show what those restrictions then unlock your possibilities. If that makes sense.
Maybe even giving like extra stuff. Like, hey guys, maybe you will try this risky stuff, and we will give you a little bit extra, but let's try to unlock it. Because if they will succeed, everyone will win, right? If they won't, okay, we keep going, and this approach should be like on at the start more like American way, where it's more optimistic, and at the end when the company starts stagnating, maybe that's where you're going like British one, because there's not much room for development. It's more about like acquiring and building maybe a holding and stuff like that. There will be probably topic about like cashing outs and so on and so on, because you can be probably too optimistic there.
So Kim, this sounds like, you know, what we're acknowledging, I think, is that there is a moving feast, and every stage we're at, we're looking at evaluation. We've got to think about who we are as a team, how we present our identity, understanding how we're going to communicate transparently with all the partners we want to work with, and the investors that we're trying to woo or date or whatever, choose your phrase. They have to feel comfortable and trust in our expectations and choices. Is that right? Is it a moving feast?
It's definitely phases. You know, as I've said before, up until a certain point where you can validate any data set, that's the time where you actually put a number on the actual validation. You know, and I think maybe I'm Scandinavian, which is probably more closer to the British side. I respect the bootstrapping company the most, the ones who say, I don't want your money. Right? I respect the ones who say we're going to keep the team tight and focus on building that game that can, you know, have this high ambition, and we want to keep control, creative control, financial control, but we might need expertise, scaling, and so on. But I rather have the studios who come to me and say, well, you know, we're going to bootstrap because the urgency for us to deliver towards the market or whatever that is, we want to try to maintain control. I mean, I respect that more than the other way of saying, hey, we have some cool stuff, we need money to do it. Then I was like, yeah, that sounds great, you know. But I like the ones who are committed to the cause and committed to the ambition. And up until a certain point, I think maybe that's where my interest lies. But once they've proven and they built that game, they built that platform, and they built whatever that is that can be validated, I think that's where you bring on the more traditional VCs, and then you go into the spreadsheeting, and then you do the valuation. But I think if I were a startup, I would, you know, it's obviously a luxury problem. It's not easy, but I would try to maintain as much control, and I would bootstrap the hell out of it, right? So I can control the vision that I want to achieve, and slowly bring on the right people over time. But obviously it's a luxury problem. You know, you have to be pragmatic. Sometimes you just need the money, right?
Eliza, what do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, if you can, that's great. You know, like, absolutely. You should always try to hold on to your stuff and believe in your own things. But I mean, again, it is a luxury problem. It's also privilege. And in some cases, we're talking about situations, if we want diversity and equity, that kind of privilege isn't then for everybody.
Absolutely.
And I find that is also one of those things that maybe that's not then the best advice. And I don't know. I don't have anything more to say actually on that.
No, but I mean, let's start, because we were running out of time.
Yeah.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give somebody looking at valuation?
Oh, I mean, yes. My 3-step thing was like the basic is kind of simple. You can always just go and look at a million, but then you do have to look at every other business out there. Who are your competitors? How are they doing? How much better are they? What are you hearing from the investors? I mean, feedback is amazing. So I always ask for feedback every single time I'm sharing something. I hate being like ghosted, because I'm like, it doesn't matter if you didn't want this or you're not interested. I want to know what you thought, because it's going to give me so much more for my next my next meeting, my next opportunity. If I don't have that, that's a big loss. So try to get all the feedback you can. You come back stronger every single time.
And equally, just tell us you're not interested. That'd be nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, actually, I've been very lucky that I've got some very clear, and they will say why, because it's not for the portfolio we're looking for. That's a great answer. Yeah. Now I understand. It wasn't what you're looking for.
Yes.
So Sam, what's the one bit of advice you would give to entrepreneurs trying to do this valuation process?
I would say think about two main things, right? It's the total addressable market, right? Or the problem that you're trying to solve for, right? In this case, when you're building a game, right? Whether you let's say you're building a VR game, VR specific game, there's going to be, you're just going to be limited by the number of VR headsets that are already in the market and the projected sales of those headsets over the next few years. So versus if you were to build an MMORPG for multi-console, right? So think about the total addressable market or the specific type of game you want to build, right? Because that's going to affect the valuation, the initial valuation and then the ultimate valuation you can get to. And then secondly, in conjunction with that, think about based on that, problem or the game that you're trying to build, the team that you need to build around it. Why are you the best team to tackle that, tackle the goal or the game that you're trying to build, right? And those two things, I think, will be the biggest determining factors of valuation, especially at the early stage.
Great stuff. Really quick, do you guys have any extra things you want to add? Because I know I'm going over time.
Yeah, at the top of what has been said already, if I was going to build another company, I would seek professional advice for this roadmap that we mentioned, because we don't know everything, and this a lot, and this can have a huge impact in the future of the company.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid of asking for help. And the second one is basically be ambitious or basically die trying, because that's the way that drives us all.
Do a lot of dating.
And on that note, this is a dating thing. I'm going to thank our panelists. Thank you, Stan, for joining us on Zoom. Thank you all for joining us here. And we're going to move on to our next group. Thank you very much, all.